Right, it is time to talk about Shannon Reads Those Books and a book review, kinda. And today we are going to be talking about Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Do you know how many times I said maddening crowd before I recognized it is, or noticed it's Madding Crowd? Yeah, a lot of times. A lot of times. All right, so please see disclaimer up above and down below on the fact that these aren't really traditional book reviews. I am working through my backlog of titles that I've read for the Shannon Reads Those Books project, and there are a fair number that I haven't reviewed, and I feel the need to review, and so I'm doing it, even though these are often books that I've read quite a while ago. So that's sort of like a disclaimer, not a traditional book review. Haven't read this for a long time. This is going to be messy, but I need to do it, so I'm going to do it. If you're unfamiliar with the Shannon Reads Those Books project, it is something that I started back in 2014, where I put together a bunch of different lists of books, including classic titles, zeitgeist titles, iconic titles, highly referenced titles, and influential titles. And my goal was to gain cultural context. There are so many things that just are continually referenced from particular books, and so I wanted to get what people were talking about or get what the reference was for so many things. And it also was to increase my reading comprehension, which will definitely come into play with this particular title. So Far from the Madding Crowd, let's take a look at some of the details for the book. It is the 36th book that I read for Those Books project. As I already mentioned, it is written by Thomas Hardy. There is a fair amount of Thomas Hardy on the list. I read this from fall 2016 to fall 2017, and that was my third or fourth attempt at the book. It was written back in 1874, and it makes the list for being on the BBC's Good Read at number 48. And I'm actually surprised it wasn't on more lists. I eventually ended up giving it a 7.5, which feels a little generous, but hey, I don't, that's what I gave it, so that's what I gave it. So Far from the Madding Crowd, I chose this. This is actually an interesting title for me to talk about because this is kind of the inspiration for the project as a whole. When it was announced that there was going to be a new book to film adaptation, which I think came out in 2015 for this book, I thought, I'm going to read that. And so it's public domain, so I don't download it to my Kobo, and I was reading it, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. Like I don't understand what I'm reading. So I'm like, so that felt really strange. And so I thought it might be time to challenge myself with my reading and read some harder texts. At the time, most of what I was reading was rather light, fast, breezy, quick reads and fun. I was enjoying my reading, but I was a little surprised that I picked up a book and I could not understand it. So that in turn turned into Those Books project. So it's funny. It's kind of cool to now come back and talk about the book where it all started. That being said, it actually did take me several attempts. I had tried to read it again in 2015 because of the book to film adaptation, which I still haven't seen. And now it used to be on Netflix and it's not anymore. So I'm like, oh, so I hate it when that happens. Anyway, so I should. It's just one of those moments where I'm like, take the opportunity. If you see something you want to watch, watch it. So I came back to it, I think for a third time. So I tried it that first time, couldn't read it. Tried it again in 2015, wasn't making any headway. I got further, but I still didn't feel like I was understanding it. And then when I finally came back to 2017, I felt like I got it. I felt like I finally got it. So yeah, so it's been an interesting journey with this book. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's I actually don't remember when it's set, but this kind of time period. And it follows, I feel like, when I read what the description is for this book, I do feel like it's a bit of a spoiler. Because I think I'm very sensitive to spoilers, but I will say that a central figure in this text is a woman who is quite independently spirited, and then we do follow other people. It's mostly from the perspective, though, I find, of other people. It's third person, and other people who are interested in her, and in particular, and we start with Farmer Oak. So I remember Farmer Oak the best because he's who you start with, and I tried reading it several times. And I am quite fond of the beginning of this book, maybe because I had to read it so many times, but there is this comfort level. It's mostly set in like sort of farmland, and she runs her own estate or her family's estate because there wasn't anyone else, which is pretty unusual at the time. I imagine, I'm not big on history, but it keeps on getting referenced. How unusual that is, and she runs the household. And yeah, so I did feel like at the third go, I did understand it, which was the goal. I don't know how much I enjoyed it. I don't love a lot of the different characters. I didn't feel like the protagonist-ish, is it the protagonist if you're not seeing from their perspective? Is it? But she's definitely the focus. But I didn't think she was an incredibly likable character. And I'm finding this comes up again and again when I read older works by men who are writing women characters, that she seems to do things that feel I don't know, like in this one, like things that in the moment seem like a petty thing, and then build to something that really has a negative impact on her and or people around her. I'm actually saying that more generally about some of the books that I've read, but it does happen in this one too. There are some things that she does that I'm like, that's not okay. You should have either not done that or rectified the situation. And so, yeah, I felt like the story itself, I didn't enjoy it too much. Some of the settings I liked, some of the things I felt were so heartbreaking. Like you can feel a great impact on people's livelihood, again and again. Like that's definitely a theme I felt in the book. Like knowing how much, not knowing necessarily how much money someone had, but just the struggle sometimes to live and to get by and to get work was really hard. And some people it's not even an issue, and some people are continually having to work towards it. And there's such a divide, and I find that a bit challenging, although realistic. So yeah. So one of the questions I always ask about those books is, was it what I expected? And I would say in terms of the setting, it was. Like it has this, they're mostly working on farms and stuff like that, and that felt very clear, open spaces, stuff like that. But I did not expect as much heartbreak with just in sort of like what people's lives are like and the impact on their lives. And it wasn't what I expected in terms of like being sort of like the idea of being like, oh yeah, there's this independent woman, and I thought that would be awesome, especially because it's historical and it would be like, inspiring or something. And I was like, oh, I just barely even liked her. So it was not what I expected on that front. And so yeah, so that was kind of weird. And I think that was the only expectation I had of it. Yeah. So in one of the other questions I ask is, will I read more from this author? I don't know. I didn't like some of the gender dynamics, and I know that this was written 100 and almost 50 years ago. But I still didn't like them, so I'm probably not going to like them in other books. The writing style is really took a while to get used to. The sentences are extremely long. They almost always have a word or like a couple. Every paragraph had a word that I was unfamiliar with. I initially, on my second attempt on this, I tried looking up all of the words, but I ended up dead stopping. It was too much to take in. And I think by the third read, I knew more of the words, and sometimes I looked them up and sometimes I didn't. I actually do have this in physical copy, but when I did my twice yearly book cleanup, I ended up putting it in sort of like a bit of a storage nook. So that was not very smart. And I actually ended up highlighting this book, which was one of my challenges in one of my reading goals for 1 year, and I regret it. I am not a highlighter. I am fine with flags. I am fine with post-its. I'm fine with highlighting when you read something digitally, but I felt like it was a mistake, especially because this book was a gift, and it's just like a regular Penguin classic, but it was a gift, and I don't like the book enough to replace it, and I am mad that I highlighted it So live and learn on that. You know, I like to try stuff out, but that did not work. So overall, as I said, 7.5. I think the writing is really interesting, but it definitely was intimidating. I'm glad I stuck it through. It felt like a very big achievement to finish reading it. It's a little sad that I didn't enjoy it as much as I expect. I didn't really have. Actually, I did think I would expect. I did think I would enjoy it. So that's a bit of a bummer. But I do plan to finally watch the film this year. Actually, it's one of my film goals of the year is to finally watched the 2015 version of Far from the Madding Crowd. So let me know, have you read it? Did you like it? Do you suggest any other Thomas Hardy works, especially if this one was kind of like just, or is it just, should it just be a no? There's so many other books to read on my Those Books project. I think it'll take me a while to get back to any one author unless I really, really enjoyed their work. And I feel like there was beauty in his writing, but I didn't always agree or enjoy what he was saying. So yeah, but that is one of the many Those Books and Sci-Fi Fantasy Weird actually reviews to come. I hope that you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.